Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm going to give everyone a minute to get signed in. While we're waiting to get started, I'll do introductions and take care of a few housekeeping items. I'm Jessie Beringer, Head of Marketing for 3D Group, and I'll be facilitating our session today. Joining me to discuss 360 feedback and communications is 3D Group President Dr. Dale Rose and Tawnie Cisneros, President of Cisneros Communications. Dr. Rose is a nationally recognized expert on talent assessment, coaching, and 360 feedback. Dr. Rose personally coaches over 100 leaders per year, including focused post-360 feedback sessions and also more long-term engagements. While he most frequently works at the executive and C-suite level, he's supported leaders at every level, from board chair to first-line supervisor. In addition to his coaching and assessment work, Dr. Rose is a widely published author in academic journals and an author and co-editor of the recently released Handbook Strategic 360 Feedback. Tawnie established Cisneros Communications as an extension of her long career of partnerships with Fortune 500 companies. As a leader in both corporations and agencies for nearly 20 years, she's consistently delivered communications guided by three key principles: integrity, partnership, and measurable business results. Tawnie brings a wealth of consulting experience in corporate communications, working with frontline employees and senior-level executives for top brands, including Abbott, Baxter Healthcare, McDonald's, Johnson Controls, Kellogg Company, and Wrigley. She specializes in global multi-year communication programs that help employees fully engage and deliver their best work. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation using the chat box on your GoToWebinar control panel. We'll be answering as many as we can at the end. So thank you all for joining us today for Beyond Launch Day, Making 360 Feedback Last. Dale, I'll hand it over to you to get started.
Thanks, Jessie, and thanks, Tawnie, for joining us today. Really excited to talk about a topic that we run into frequently, which is kind of what we've got the program built, and what do we do now? And I think this is a challenge that many clients run into, to think about a 360 process as more than just an event. So often there'll be a particular purpose or use that someone will be wanting to build a 360 for, and then once that has been launched and used, then there's sort of this, where do we go with it from here? And I think one of the things that we've learned in talking and working with Tawnie is that really looking at what goes beyond that and how you sustain the purpose, intent, and benefits of a 360 program gives you a great opportunity to leverage the tool for quite a bit greater ROI, but it requires some attention and some rigor and some purpose around how to keep that momentum going. And what I love about what Tawnie will share later is just this idea that you can put a structure and a process to it to get that ROI and keep it going. And I think hoping is not necessarily the best plan, but some of the methods that Tawnie's going to share really provide some great structure and focus to how to get that ROI once that initial kind of excitement is over. So let me start with just a simple kind of definition, if you will. And one of the things that we find when we do talk to organizations about 360 feedback is when someone says, well, we have a 360 feedback program, we don't necessarily know a lot about what they do. So they all look a little different. They all have slightly different purposes. But at the bottom, at the core of them all, they all involve some method of kind of collecting, quantifying, reporting observations of coworkers about typically leaders, could be an individual contributor, but it's always oriented toward creating change, right? It's not a report card per se. It's a reflection on where a person's at today so that they can figure out where they want to go tomorrow. And I think being really clear about that core is very important. We explicitly, exclude from this definition things like qualitative data and interviews and such that might be very usefully combined with 360. But when you start looking at that more carefully, it starts to create some problems in terms of how you understand it. So I think first off, thinking about it in terms of this scalable, quantifiable method. So one of the key benefits of this definition is it allows an organization to leverage 360 across the organization at scale in ways that reflect not just on the individual, but you notice even in our definition here, organizational change, right? So one of the things we're very focused on is strategic uses of 360 feedback, and that strategic use is around the organization's benefit. So I think one of the things you'll see as we go through this today is not just thinking about a 360 as an impact on a leader and what that impact is, but rather also, in addition to that, how do we get impact across the organization, and how do we leverage the tool to benefit the organization more broadly? And that's the kind of work that we're really excited about, and I think that this webinar is going to help us reflect on quite a bit. So you'll often hear, this notion of, well, feedback is a gift. We actually think about feedback not as a gift. A gift is something you give with no strings and it's almost something you do for yourself, right? Really, if you're giving feedback to a leader and you don't see them do anything with it, what's the likelihood that you're going to continue to give them feedback and invest more in their development if they continue to ignore it? So we think about feedback more as an investment. That if raters providing feedback to leaders see that leader is taking it seriously and using it, they're going to continue making more investments. But if they see that leader ignoring it or the organization not using it, filling out a 360 survey is a discretionary task. Are they really going to keep doing that? And what you want to do as an organization is create a program and a process for your 360 that encourages raters to continue investing in their leaders. And when you start thinking about it more as an investment, what can I do to get those raters to invest in those leaders, to give them honest feedback, to really help them improve? You start looking at the way you're designing your program, it really changes the conversation and changes the frame quite a bit. Now, we hear this question quite frequently. It's, how do we know? So thinking about 360s as an investment, we're frequently asked the question, how do we improve the ROI of our 360 feedback process? Occasionally we'll get questions of, is there an ROI and what is the ROI of 360? What I like to point out there is that because every 360 program is so wildly different, there is no standard singular ROI for 360. It's entirely dependent upon the particular implementation in that particular organization. There really is no generic answer to that question. The thing that people often overlook when they think about their ROI, what they're thinking about is, are we getting something for our money? We're investing in this program, this process. Are we getting something for it? Okay, and indeed, you are getting something for it. Often the focus is really around the cost, right? If we can lower the cost, we can improve the ROI. I think that's true to a certain extent, but there are diminishing returns there. On the other hand, if you think about the benefit aspect of your 360 process, what are the benefits that our people are getting? How are we using the information? There's almost no limit to that. So you can diminish your costs to a certain point to improve your ROI. But if you switch the paradigm a little bit, and not that you're going to ignore costs, but if you think about benefits, what are the benefits we can get out of our 360 and how can we get more of those? That is your single greatest lever for increasing ROI. And I think that's really the crux of what we're going to be talking about today is how can you increase those benefits in ways that often are overlooked. Well, a couple ways to think about that. You can think about more feedback, just get more of it will get you greater benefits. You can think about it as getting better feedback, right? Higher quality, more honesty in the feedback. Feedback that makes more sense. It fits people's roles. We talk a lot in our writing about credible feedback, right? From the right people on the right topics. So a lot of our process improvements and things like that orient around this idea of better feedback. And then there's beyond feedback in the sense of what do you do once you get the results? So I got the results. I've got my feedback. What do I do now? I think these last two are where a lot of energy gets put into trying to increase those benefits. I think what we're going to be learning today is methods not just for the better and the beyond, but really how do we get more? How do we get more feedback across the organization thinking about the organizational impact, because in designing your process, you've invested in building it out and getting the right content, the right competencies. You've translated it. You've messaged it out in terms of what it's for. You've got the report just right. You've got a whole procedure for how to. You do all that stuff. The more you leverage it, the more your benefit comes in terms of your total cost of ownership. So if you spend a whole bunch up front to build it, and then only a few people use it, you're not getting as much out of it than if a lot of people leverage that initial investment. So figuring out how you can get more people to leverage this tool is going to increase your return on investment overall. Now, when we think about how does 360 feedback work and how do we make it better, we've done, Dave Brackman and I have written about this notion of sort of, these are all the various elements that you can look at to get 360 feedback to drive behavior change. Ultimately, acceptance is kind of that key pivot point, right? If people don't accept the feedback as valid, they're not going to create change. So you have to think about how all these things sort of feed in. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these different lines and the distal and proximal effects and all that kind of thing by any means, but rather to say, what we do to just sort of recognize that there is a complexity in the way that 360s drive change, and being thoughtful about the various features is really critical to make sure you're getting that return on investment. Because again, if you go through the whole process, you design it, people get their feedback, but they don't use it to change, you're not getting any ROI, you're not getting any return. You're trying to get people to improve as leaders, and that's where the real value comes in. So there's lots written here, and read the article. It'll go into these in great detail. But one of the things when we were talking about what we might share with you today is we recognize that while there is all this complexity, what it typically looks like is really something a little bit more like this. You start with, well, gee, who should get feedback, right? Basic question. Who do I need to become better as leaders is fundamentally the question. But as soon as you start going, well, that group of leaders over there, or all of our top 250 leaders need to level up to achieve our strategy, then other questions start to pop in. And this is really more what that day-to-day looks like, certainly, than our complex diagram. All these elements fit within there, but it tends to kind of pop at you a little bit. What we recognize is that when you're asking all these are all really important questions, right? They're all absolutely critical in designing a 360 feedback process. They all, like I said, they all fit into that slightly more organized framework. But one that is often overlooked and yet particularly from a sustaining the program perspective. So most of these are oriented around how do I build the process, how's it going to work? But very few of them address this question of how am I going to sustain the program? How is this going to continue to add value over time? Right, my initial leadership new model, this is going to be a great way to message out what our new leadership model is. But 5 years down the road, when it's not the new model, how am I going to keep this adding value and keep leaders hungry to improve and develop? And this is where we start asking the questions around readiness of our leaders. How ready are our leaders to get feedback and run this race of getting better? And I think this is where we get into some of the questions of sustainability of the process for the organization over time. That if you can create an environment where participants, leaders typically, who are going to be getting feedback, understand what it is, how to use it, how it will help them, are ready to use it to improve as leaders, then it becomes a sustainable, leverageable tool that you can use for years to come in your organization for leaders who want and need that growth. So this is I think the crux of what we're seeing is that if you can understand what you can do within your organization to get them ready to receive and really want the feedback, that's where you can drive a lot of value over the long term. Now, interestingly, just to kind of give an example, I actually had one of our project managers pull up one of our clients that we've been working with for, I don't know, 8 or 9 years here, and that I recalled had sort of had this kind of model. And I said, what happened to that organization? It's a large national organization with a couple thousand leaders. They started with a new model, new leadership model. We're really excited about it. They piloted the process with 65 people the very first year, and then they rolled it out. And boy, there was a lot of adoption the first couple of years. This is the number of leaders who received feedback over each year. So the second year, 902, and then 920, and then this huge drop off. And as you can see, it kind of just it's still there. It's still a fair number of leaders if you think about it across the organization, but it went from super exciting, lots of leverage, lots of value, to, oh yeah, there's that thing, right? And so the question is, when we see patterns like this, we recognize that this organization is not, they in a sense, they sort of had the event, and then they left it out there, as a thing people could do if they felt like it. And so to the extent that there were people who knew about it, who understood the value of it, who could leverage it well, those folks were leveraging it and using it. But the people who weren't part of that initial push, or new leaders, et cetera, they just lost a lot of momentum and, frankly, a lot of the value. So the question we want to ask ourselves today is, well, if most organizations are going to start this pattern in the first couple of years. They'll do a little pilot, they'll have a big flash. The question is, after that 920, maybe it's not 900 a year, but maybe it's 750. Maybe it goes up. How do you sustain that level so that you're getting the ROI and you're keeping your leaders focused on how they can get better? So again, the question, how do we reverse the trend? How do you make it go up this way? And it may not go, escalate continually. Maybe it goes up and then it sort of flattens out. Well, this is where I think Tawnie can provide some great insights into the value of communicating and driving some desire for a process like this to continue your leaders developing and growing over time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it over to Tawnie and let her talk about how she approaches this. And then I will sort of, as I see opportunities, I may sort of pepper in a story here and there. So with that, Tawnie, let's turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Dale. Appreciate it. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you're tuning in today. Thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to share what I would call a real game changer for your 360 feedback program. And really, this is a model that you can apply to just about anything in your world, in your life. Because like 360 feedback, change management is really just about people at the heart of it. If we do this well, if we do change management well, we're going to capture heads, hands, and hearts. And what that translates to for your organization is better adoption and better long-term ROI. So instead of that decline in participation, you're going to get an increase in participation over time, or at least keep those levels steady, right? That's a good thing too. So when we talk about heads, what do we mean? What we mean is, do your people really understand why we're doing this? Do they have an understanding of what the game plan is for how you're going to roll this out? And have you really given them reasons to want to join you on the journey that you're about to take? When we talk about hands, what we're talking about is whether or not your folks have the right information that they need and the right training that they need in some cases to implement new skills, new behaviors. If they don't know how to do it, there's no way they can come along on the journey with you. And then finally, have we captured their hearts? Which is, I leave this for last because it's actually probably the most important part of all. Capturing hearts means people have something invested in it with you. So are they receiving the recognition that they deserve for having new and right behaviors? Do they get the coaching they need, or do they see the right disincentives perhaps for getting rid of some of those old behaviors and retiring some old habits? And have you and your team really removed any of the roadblocks that might be in their way for for them to succeed. So that's what we mean when we say head, hands, and heart. And so let's move then to the model. The Prosci ADKAR model is what I want to share with you today. This is not my model. This is a model by the world-renowned research organization called Prosci, which you see there at the top of your screen. This is a model that's available to anyone. You could go on their website and learn more about this. But I want to talk about it in the context of 360 feedback today, because it really can be a game changer for you in how people choose to adopt and then choose to stick with your program over time. After all the work that you might put into launching and developing and customizing a 360 program for your organization, you really want it to stick. You want to demonstrate that ROI. So let's talk about the 5 stages in the ADKAR model. Awareness is where you're helping people understand why, what, how, and when your program is all going to take place. So it's giving them the basic information. If you remember and call back to that head, hands, and hearts, this is really in that head space, right? Where you're trying to help people understand what this program is all about and why they would even want to participate. In the desire stage, that's really about the heart. This is where you're giving them compelling reasons to want to, on that individual level, decide to make the commitment and make the jump into this program. You want to share at this point the good and the bad, the reasons why, and in some cases, in some organizations, they like to share consequences too. And so this is where it's really appropriate to do that. Then you have this knowledge stage. And again, going back to that head, hands, and hearts idea, this is where the hands come in, right? So we've got to give people the right information and skills to know how they're going to support the program. And it flows, and sometimes these 2 stages can even work a little bit together, but in the ability stage, this is where you're making it possible for people to use the new skills and new behaviors that you're asking them to exhibit. So many times we expect people to jump in and support a program when they may not be able to, whether it's physically or mentally or process-wise or technology-wise. And so that ability stage is really important. And then finally, and perhaps, in the staircase that Dale shared with us, maybe most importantly, is this reinforcement stage, where we want to think about repetition of our messages. We want to think about incentives or consequences that we're sharing over time with folks to help them participate and find meaning in what we're doing. We want to fix anything that maybe didn't go well at launch or maybe could be improved from launch. And we also want to share the wow stories of where it's working and where it's making a difference for people, which only will reinforce that desire stage that you see in this model. One last point about this model, and I think it's really important when Dale showed that 8-year progression of his partner, this model can repeat itself over time for any individual. It can repeat itself over time for the next phase of your project. And so it's sort of an evergreen model that you can use in this program, in any program, but also over the life cycle of your 360 program. So now that we've talked about the model, let's do a little poll here so that you can really apply this model in the 360 program that you may be undertaking right now. Or if you haven't quite made that jump yet, you can apply this model to any program that you've kind of got open and you're wishing maybe for better adoption right now. Let's just take a minute. On a scale of 1 to 5, how is your program doing on the first stage of ADKAR, the awareness stage? In other words, do your people know why? Do they know what? Do they know how? Do they know when? Do they understand? Are they aware of your program? And Jesse, I know you've got the answers over there. You can bring that back anytime to share that with us. All right, let's see. Oh, so this is pretty good. Most people, looks like you're in the 3 to 4. You're doing okay. We've got maybe a few folks struggling a little bit. So let's talk about some strategies for how you can make awareness even stronger in your organization. So the first thing I'll tell you is that at the start of your program, and if you didn't do it at the start, it's okay. You can do this as a round 2. Find your sponsors. And your sponsors certainly are going to be the leaders in your organization, but they're also going to be maybe those super users or people who really have some vested interest in this program. Find those people, make them your megaphone in this program, because they may have the voice or the platform from which to do that. Also here, you want to focus on the heart in this stage a little bit. You want to focus on the why. And as a pro tip, rather than sharing only facts and figures with your folks on this program, share stories. People understand and gravitate. It's the story of humanity, right? We tell stories to share the why and the what and the how. It's so much more powerful than any facts or figures that you can share. In this stage, if we look at the next bullet here, in this stage, it's so important to keep it really simple and memorable at this stage. You want to save all the nitty-gritty details for later, because at this stage, you're just trying to get people to understand the basics of your program and where you're going to be going from here, how you want them to come along on the journey with you. It's great if you can be visual at this stage. Visuals really help. Much like stories, they carry a little bit of visceral weight and they get attention. And you want to use multiple channels, because everybody in your audience is not going to take in information in the same way. Some people may prefer email, some people may love your TV monitors, some people may need a piece of paper in their hand. So use multiple channels to build that awareness of your program. And finally, and I'm going to repeat this a lot today, you want to repeat and repeat and repeat your messages over time. I'll pause here for a minute on this point, because one of the things that happens in a lot of these 360 programs, and really any change management program, is that we who are building out those programs really know the program forward and backward by the time we launch it. And so we tend to want to just abbreviate our messages or only say them once or twice, sort of the one and done syndrome. But it's so important that we remember that the people that we're sharing this with, this is their first exposure to it. They may have never even heard of a program like this before. So you're going to want to repeat those messages over and over and over again, and you're going to hear me say it a lot today. So let's move on to our next stage, the desire stage. And once again, let's take a quick poll. Think about your program and the stage that it's in right now. How are you doing on desire? Do your people have compelling reasons to participate? Have you captured their heart? Think about that for a minute. Are you struggling? Is it great? Are your people just hungry for this right now, or do they need maybe some more compelling reasons to participate? Have you told any stories? Do they understand the why? Jesse, whenever you see we've got everybody or most of our folks have keyed off there, you can share those results. Okay, this is kind of this is perfectly normal, by the way. If you're feeling uncomfortable answering this question, the desire stage is tough, right? Because you're competing with 400 other fires in your organization that your people are trying to focus on. And so the desire stage can be really tough. So let's talk about some ways to make desire a little bit higher in your program. So the first thing that you want to do at the desire stage, because you've completed your awareness stage by now, so here's where you really want to start listening and responding to any questions or concerns or misunderstandings that your people might have at this place. You also want to listen for what really worked. So if there are things that some people just lit up over in your messaging, you want to share that over and over again. Go back to repeating some of those messages. But if you don't have a feedback channel at this stage, here's the time where you may want to create one so that you understand why either things might be falling a little bit flat and desire might be a little bit flat, or where you can really capitalize and do more with certain parts of your messaging. Another thing that you can do at this place is if there are objections to this, and I'm going to take a time-honored objection as an example, but let's say that your people say, we are so busy in our organization right now, we do not have time to implement one more program. It's just too much. You and your team can take this moment in time to figure out what the diffusing message is behind that objection. So you may say, we actually don't have time not to do this program. We really need to be thinking about how our leaders can be more efficient, effective in our organization, and 360 is the program that's going to deliver that for us. So take some time to arm your people to think about, anticipate, and diffuse objections. It helps so much to really help people, overcome those objections and move forward. This is another
Tawnie,
place, too, where you can... Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Dale.
I was just going to jump in briefly. I have a great story on this one where, we had a leader in an organization. It was a large real estate development company, and their brokers were wanted the leadership among their brokerage group wanted to do this at the top of the organization. They did, and there was quite a bit of resistance, and there was one leader in particular who was just sure that it was a horrible use of his time. And they had, but at the very top, they were he was very interested. So the very top, the president said, no, we're going to do it. And so the next layer down participated with a little bit of resistance. But after the 1 hour coaching session with this individual, he realized he just had so many ahas, and it was so powerful for him as a leader that he completely flipped around. And in fact, at the next all-staff meeting, he stood up in front of the whole group, and in a sense, the person that everyone knew was going to absolutely resist this and thought it was just, silliness, stood up and said, no, this is the most powerful thing you can do as a leader. You should all be driving to doing this, and you should all be doing this each year. So I think that notion of stories and the kind of flipping it around a little bit was just very, very powerful in this case.
It's a great example of both those 2 points, right? You knew that you had someone who was sort of an outlier and hadn't bought in, had zero desire, and you really turned him around by listening, having conversation, and diffusing those objections. Great example, Dale.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple of other things you can do in the desire phase. You can also highlight incentives or consequences. We've worked with some companies who had friendly competitions between functions to see who could reach, maximum participation by a certain date, and there were sort of scaled prizes and incentives along the way. And we've worked with other organizations who, in their culture, consequences were really normal, and really people were comfortable with that. And so there were consequences. If you didn't do this by then, there were other X consequences. So you can also highlight incentives and consequences along the way in your program. And finally, here in the desire phase, if you find through the feedback that you're getting, or, if we think about Dale's example, had he had conversation with that leader where he found that maybe the argument just hadn't been compelling enough to that point, it's time to upgrade your why. If the initial messaging was confusing, or the initial rollout might have been confusing, or if we just didn't give people enough reasons to believe in the program, it's time to upgrade your why. And it's never too late to do that. It's okay to go back out, remembering once again that although we're very familiar with this program, most of our audience haven't, and they probably haven't heard enough about it from you. So repeat, repeat, repeat. So with that, let's jump to the knowledge phase. And remember here, this is going to be all about the skills and the know-how that you need to support the program. So think about your program once again. Let's do a little interactivity here, get a poll going. How is your program doing on knowledge right now? Do your people know what they need to do to support your program? Take a minute, share your answers. This is a tricky one. Sometimes it's a little hard to know. So once you know, Jesse, you can pop those answers back up for all of us, and let's take a look at what we've got today. Okay, pretty solidly in the middle. All right, so let's talk about some strategies here. It's really important at this point to know what the current state of your audience skill level is. So for those folks who answered maybe 2 in that little area, think about if you really understand what skills your people have today and what skills you want them to have in the future. You want to bridge that gap, and if you haven't yet, or you don't know exactly what those things are, now's the time to build that strategy on how you can bridge that gap. Now also is the time for details. So I know I told you earlier in the awareness stage, you want to keep it brief, you want to keep it simple and memorable. Now's the time to bring out all those details that you need to share with folks so that they can really drill down to, what do I need to know? What do I need to do in order to support this program? You might consider at this stage phasing things by your audience. Not everyone necessarily has to come along on the same journey at the same time. They may all need to complete the steps, yes, but they may not need to do that at the same pace or at the same time. So for instance, if you have super users, this may be an audience where you want to accelerate the pace because they're loving it, they want more of it, and it's time to give them some free rein. For others who might be dragging their feet a little bit, you may need to slow down. You may need to do a little bit more repetition. You may need to do some face-to-face work. So think about your audience and phase your communications appropriately. Also at this phase, you can make resistance work for you. And I would bet in Dale's story that we heard earlier, this is a place where they did that. So where you have a leader or a group, a team, or an individual who might be having some frustrations or might be resisting, use your sponsors where they exist, use those leaders who find value in the program, use those people and those super users who love the program. Tell some turnaround stories. Dale's story is a fantastic one, and if you know of any folks who have done that, use them as your new megaphone. Those are the perfect people to say, I wasn't a believer and now I am. And finally, as you learn about resistance points, make that work for you. Add that to your overcoming objections work. Easter egg here for anyone who's paying close attention. Jesse's going to be following up with everyone who's with us today. We actually have a tool that you can use to help you with your overcoming objections work, and Jesse will give you an opportunity to get your hands on that in some of our follow-up communications to this. So Easter egg, it's right there. And then Dale, did I hear you?
Yeah, let me just throw in another little bit of info here. So when we in this phase, this is where people I think put most of their effort. Often, what we find in our benchmark study is well over half of the companies report using sort of email or static, links on an intranet, FAQ pages, that kind of thing, to share knowledge about these programs that are mostly pull with a little bit of push. That tends to be the norm. What we see is less than a third do a variety of different live type orientation meetings. And any opportunity you have for a Q&A, right? This was the great thing in my story, is that the particular leader I'm talking about was able, to show what he had done, but also, and how valuable it was to him. But he was also able to say, look, if you're thinking about doing this 1 hour follow-up debrief with a coach and you're not sure, you should do it. And so part of that was motivating them and getting their desire to really, dig in, but also just even informationally letting them know that there was a coach available to spend an hour with them on their report was a really critical thing for a lot of those leaders. Again, if you think back to your ROI about who wants to actually get better as a leader, and do they know what levers they can pull to make that happen? So we don't see nearly enough of this from an ROI perspective in terms of usage of that live. Now, of course, a lot of that has to do with scale, right? If you're trying to scale this globally, it's hard to be live in front of people. But of course, webinar type methodologies can allow for some of that. I guess I would say with 360s, there's also a unique aspect here where the knowledge phase, transparency is really important. It will drive usage a ton when people know how the information is going to get used, who's going to get what report, that sort of thing. So being clear in this phase really can help unpack some of the concerns people might have about the process. And so just being as transparent as you can about the entire process is going to really make a big difference.
Great points. Thanks, Dale. All right, well, let's jump to the ability phase. On a scale of 1 to 5, think about your program once again. How are you doing on ability? Are your people, do they have the actual ability to use these new skills, these new behaviors? Are there any barriers that are standing in their way? Let's think about your program for just a moment. Barriers can be things like technology, they can be things like process, they can be things like other leaders who might not believe. Think about that for a moment. Looks like we've got our results here. Okay, interesting. Not surprising, but interesting. So here again, the desire phase and the ability phase of the ADKAR model tend to be two of the places where folks really struggle to get the pickup. And it makes sense. So let's talk about some strategies here. You are not alone. The first thing in the ability phase is to really consider training. And one of the reasons that we find in the change management programs that we support with our partners is that training is often considered a waste of time or too tough to implement or just too hard to do or cost prohibitive. And that is understandable, and those things can all be true. Training is timely, and it can be an additional cost in your program. However, sometimes it is really necessary to have some level of training in order to give your people the true ability to jump into your program. I know Dale's certainly the expert in terms of training on 360. And Dale, do you have any maybe thoughts on how training integrates to your 360 program?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing from training and ability with 360s is around rater training, so they understand how to provide quality feedback, that they understand how to use rating scales, how to write good comments. There's a ton of research we've done on how to improve the quality of comments, and without that training, it can be really pretty messy. And we know the research is pretty clear that rater training can have a huge impact on accuracy. And at the end of the day, all of this depends on accurate, valid feedback that somebody's going to use to make pretty important decisions. So rater training, and then also training the leaders themselves. So for example, in our process, we have a sort of a rater training video that people can watch before they fill out surveys, so it doesn't have to be, a scheduled event, that kind of thing. But then there's the other side of it with the person reading the report and trying to figure out, what do I do with this? How do I use it? And so, having some sort of clear interpretation guide, at least, if not really, frankly, having a one-on-one session to sort of sort through the feedback to prioritize where should I focus. I think these are the two kind of key audiences that you have to think about in terms of making them feel comfortable with providing feedback in a way that they're gonna use the tool and leverage it going forward. If they're kind of, I wasn't really sure how to fill that survey out, or I got my report but I don't know what to do with it, that's where it can be pretty problematic. And we see that does happen a fair amount, actually. If you don't attend to this, we do a strategic 360 forum a couple times a year where we invite people to come and just sort of share best practices or current practices and learn from each other. And we had a company come a couple years ago and share their experience, and they'd rolled the 360 out across the organization with like 5,000 leaders. And I guess in the platform they were using, the tool they were using for their 360s, they could sort of see, who had downloaded the reports and who hadn't. And they reported that 40% of the leaders who had participated in the process had actually not downloaded their report like 3 months afterwards. So,
oh no,
it was shocking. I mean, I was like, you are not working with the right people. But and again, I think that was a compound of all these things. But one of them is they'd probably use them again and again and again, and just didn't really feel like they could understand or get anything out of it. So I think making sure that people can read and use the report well and provide feedback are the two kind of key areas where we see this popping up.
Great, very helpful. So if you're interested in training, obviously Dale's can help you with that. But once you do your training, I also always recommend that you ask your people how ready they feel. That's a place where you can learn a lot. Once again, they're going to ask questions, or they're going to share where they're uncomfortable, and that's your time to act and help them learn, break through any barriers they see and really be able to participate to the level you want them to. So let's move to our last phase here, the reinforcement phase. This is where you're going to really make sure that your program has long-term strength, right? So are you repeating your messages? Are you providing recognition or consequences to folks where you need to change behaviors or you want to reward behaviors? Are you fixing anything that might be standing in their way? And over time, if we think about Dale's program, that ladder, over 8 or 9 years, are you really sustaining the understanding of it? Are you continuing to make improvements and create reasons for people to want to participate? Let's see what our results tell us here. Yeah. Okay, so once again, there's a reason we share this session today, because we want you to have that long-term success. So let's talk about some strategies for how we can get you up into those 4 and 5 areas. So the first thing I want to share is that this is, 360 is not an event in time. It's not a one and done. And we say this to ourselves, but it's hard, right? In our roles, we roll out a new program, and then we have 400 other fires plus our day job to get back to, right? So we want to roll this out. We want to have told everybody what we told them, and we want them to just get on with it and get their 360 done. But that's not how it works. We want to think about ahead of time, what are those milestones that we want to celebrate? And how do we make those open to everybody? How do we also, at the early stages of the program, how do we get those early adopters to, get some incentives and feel excited about it? So we shared some ideas around that earlier today. For your leaders, they're going to be most interested in whether or not their investment is paying off, right? So this is also a time where you can share ROI with your leaders and make sure that they understand that they're getting something for their investment. Certainly, continue telling those stories. I'll say that all the time. But also in the reinforcement stage, if we stop thinking about it as a one and done event, this is our time where we can fix what's broken and we can continue to think about what iterations would make this fresh and new and interesting and of value to create that desire in our people. What can we do to continually renew this program and make it exciting and interesting for people over time? How can we tie it to what's happening in their everyday versus making it sort of an add-on to everything in their world? So with that, I want to make sure we leave a little bit of room for questions today. I want to turn it back over to Jessie, our facilitator, so that you can share with us, Jessie, any questions we might have and we can share today.
Sure. Thanks, Tawnie. Renee from Irvine Company wrote in a question. In the awareness phase, can you provide some examples of be visual? What does be visual mean?
Oh, absolutely. So we think about infographics. We think about really quick, almost Instagram-like, not using Instagram, although you could if your organization does that, but using Instagram-like visuals to help people understand what the ideas are behind your program. Because remember, at this stage, you're just trying to create some muscle memory for people of what this is and what it means, and you're trying to get at the head and the heart in this stage. So it's okay if you don't put every detail of what your program is all about. If you use some inspiring imagery or just 1 or 2 words to explain your program, that's enough in the awareness stage. And you can do that by using highly evocative images.
Yeah, I've seen organizations put headshots of leaders that had gotten feedback with little quotes, sort of recognizable leaders sort of around the organization when the 360 was running. So it was an annual cycle, and for the 2 or 3 weeks, there are little, of open registration. There are images of some of the leaders that have gotten feedback with quick little quotes about how great it was or how useful it was.
Brilliant.
Great. Jessica from Google asked how to create the what's in it for me in a culture where assessments are new and ROI is unclear until the process is complete. I think that's for you, Tawnie.
It's a really good question. I actually love this question because was it Jessica? Is that the name? It's so, the what's in it for me is the right question to ask yourself. Because often we come at this thinking about what's in it for the organization versus what's in it for the individual. And you do have to make that case. So what I always recommend is to put yourself in the place of your audience. Why would a busy leader find a 360-degree program of benefit? So that's stage one, is sort of to put yourself in their shoes. I also always recommend using real words and stripping away the jargon from whatever it is that you're going to share with folks. So I've seen organizations go out with very complicated, sentences like, this is going to offer you an opportunity to really improve and leverage your career strengths. And no, this is going to make you a more successful executive, right? Very simple language that speaks to why people would care about it. And I think too, the what's in it for me can be expressed really clearly with stories. And because you mentioned, Jessica, the assessments are new in your organization, your people may not really have a clear picture of what even 360 is. The term, if they've never heard it before, if they've never done it before, can be a little bit unfamiliar. So stories of how it works and stories of why it works, what it does for the individual, can be really powerful here.
And I would throw in with 360 feedback in particular, probably one of the biggest what's in it for me for leaders is the blind spot concept, right? The idea that there's feedback out there, there's stuff out there you don't know about how effective you are as a leader that you want to know that will help you be better. And so I think there's a lot of sort of certainly new leaders, but really any leader, there are opportunities for growth out there. And if your culture, your organizational culture is oriented toward growth, positioning it as this is an opportunity for growth, that's what's in it for you. Leaders can't grow and develop without honest feedback from the people they work with, because influencing and supporting those people is kind of the big job of leadership.
Think about that blind spot concept, Dale, as a visual. Wouldn't that be fun to use for a leader? What's your blind spot, right?
Right.
What a great way to build awareness for the program.
And again, here's a way to get over that blind spot. Not just we're gonna push it at you so you feel like you learn something scary about yourself, but rather we're going to help you address it. So.
So Kim just wrote in, I'm not sure who this is for, but you two can decide. What can you recommend for an organization who has senior level executives who aren't interested in 360 feedback, but at the VP level and below there is an interest?
I start with the super users every time. I don't worry about the folks who don't want it. Now there are inherent risks in that, in that your VP and below may be really invested in this, and yet your senior executives may not be willing to implement the program. But what more often we see tends to happen is that as super users pick up and begin to use it and begin to see the benefits, others do. I guess I would add one other thing, that you may want to double check your sponsors at that point. And if you need some executive sponsors, or Dale's example was fantastic earlier, that maybe you have some one-to-one discussions with those senior leaders and understand why they have no interest. Perhaps you can upgrade your desire or your messaging in that way.
Yeah, and I would agree. I would just start with the people that really are interested. The nice part is that the senior leadership will probably have an opportunity to complete some surveys so they get a feel for it and may start to see the value and the benefit of it. They may be resistant to the idea that people down in the organization want to participate, but if they are aware that in this day and age, sort of ignoring feedback, not getting feedback is not really the way to attract and retain top talent, particularly at the lower levels of organizations, where you tend to find people that are newer, younger in their career and are more feedback hungry. So if the senior leadership is afraid of feedback, but the people down lower in the organization really are craving it, they'll find it. They just might not find it at your organization. They might leave and find it elsewhere. So I'd be pretty careful about stifling feedback down in the organization. Not a great retention strategy.
Okay, thank you. So Victor from Nike asked, what's the right level of information to share with all employees? What's the best medium and timing?
It will depend a little bit on the culture in your organization. If you are a culture that shares a lot and is willing to, help employees understand what it is that you're asking of your leaders and what their part might be in that, then you can openly share what the program is and what their part will be. I think the key, maybe going back to Jessica's what's in it for me, is that you keep it appropriate to what's important to that all employee audience. Again, you don't have to necessarily share all the details of how the program works and what the technology is behind it and what the schedule is behind it and all those kinds of things, but you might just share what's important and relevant to your all employee audience.
Yeah, and I tend toward openness and transparency. I like to say that, kids are afraid of the dark and adults are afraid of the light. Shed light on it and people will be less interested and concerned. So in general, process transparency about who gets reports, what the feedback's going to be used for, all that stuff just engenders better usage of it and trusting those employees that having the information is going to be better than not. In my experience with 360, there's rarely anything particularly secret about it. I think, obviously individual responses, you got to protect data and stuff like that. But process-wise, I think the more people know, the better as a general rule.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I think we addressed this somewhat earlier, but Dennis from Right Management asked, what are some best practices for preparing respondents ahead of a launch? I think that's probably for you, Dale.
Right. This is that readiness idea. It's communicating, giving them the information. I think the most important thing is around purpose. We see a lot of organizations that will launch a 360 without adequately addressing what's the purpose, what's the hope, what am I going to get out of this? And so I think just communicating with them what the process is going to be and what the purpose is in a way that's consistent with implementation, right? So they don't sort of, gee, I thought this was for development only, but you just fired me with it. It's probably not a good idea. But I would say, again, you can do some of those sort of like online videos. You can information, written information. But I really have a strong bias toward some opportunity for Q&A, some back and forth. The learning that happens in a back and forth in an adult learning world is so much stronger when they can ask a question, hear an answer, rather than read an FAQ sheet that has a question that's mostly like theirs. So any opportunity you have to give participants getting feedback a place they can ask and get answered questions, I think will significantly enhance the trust in the process.
Okay, thank you. I think we're coming down to the wire on time, but I have one more question for Tawnie. Several questions came in along these lines. How do you bring your leaders and sponsors along for the whole journey?
I would say it's storytelling all the way. So your leaders, although they do want the facts and figures, they want to know that it's working. And I would choose a cadence that's appropriate given your organizational culture and how they prefer to be informed. But bring them along on the journey, help them understand, what is working, how the program is going, but what are the faces of the program? Who is really benefiting from this? How is it changing their world as a leader and your company also? Your leaders are going to be invested in this because they want to see your company overall succeed as well as themselves succeed. So you can share kind of the faces of your 360 program and why it's having real real benefit at the micro level, that individual level, but also the macro organizational level. And those are the things that if you put yourself in front of them and share relevant information, interesting stories over time, that's what's going to keep them, in the passenger seat with you on this journey.
The thing I've seen work the best is have them get feedback, because then they know the value. They've done it themselves.
Right.
Great, thank you. So thank you everyone for that fantastic discussion, really wonderful questions. What we've discussed today is timely and relevant for you, and you want to talk about your 360 process with Dale and Tawnie. Reach out to us at 510-463-0333. We'd love to talk to you. Before we sign off, I want to take this opportunity to let you know about two great 360 feedback resources. The first is the newly released Handbook of Strategic 360 Feedback. This was written and edited by the industry's top experts, including one of our own. It's going to be the new go-to book for all things 360. So thank you for joining us. We're giving you out a 30% discount code to buy the book on the publisher website. It's also available on Amazon. Also, we're currently in the process of doing our latest 360 feedback benchmark study. You heard Dale reference that data throughout. We'll be closing the survey soon, so if you have an active 360 process and haven't participated, now is the time. We'll send you an advance copy. I'll be sending out more information about this as a follow-up to today. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.